So we're going to do a slightly deeper dive into the myth of World War II and how and why it's breaking down and what that means. And I'm going to try to do a lot of development of this idea and show you how it has manifested. So stay to the end. Now, because the myth of World War II is effectively an unstable myth with no central authority and no framework holding it up, no institutions to perpetuate a single vision of this myth or distribute it appropriately, it ends up splintering into a lot of stories that don't rise to the level of mythos. And those stories are then splintered themselves by lots of people telling the same story or similar stories over and over again that are meant to point at the myth or boost the myth or retell the myth. But that's not a higher story at all. It doesn't rise to the level of a myth. It's just broken stories, more and more broken stories. Now, if you're careful and you're paying attention, this is a pattern that came from somewhere else that I've talked about before. And so this pattern that already happened, we'll say in another sphere at an earlier time, has come full force to manifest, we'll say at a slightly lower level, the level of mythos and storytelling. The myth of World War II doesn't look like an enchanted story because it's flat. And it's worth thinking about, well, what flattens this myth? What caused this flattening? And one problem with, we'll say, the mechanisms that we're using to spread this myth is that there's no custom delivery agent, right? Which would be a person who knows you, or at least knows your specific cultural circumstances, right? So say at the local level, the community level, and can modify that myth or the way it's told to you and your needs or the needs of your community, and surround that myth with supporting stories because it's a flat thing that's further away from you. When someone writes a book, that author doesn't know you. They may know some of the conditions that you're familiar with, we'll say, but they don't know you. They don't know what you need to hear out of a myth because they've never met you. They may not even know your community. They may have been in your community when it was different. And so it may sound familiar because the place names are familiar, but conditions have changed. Maybe demographics have changed. Maybe the community you're in, which looks like the community they were in, has completely different people in it with completely different sets of beliefs. And there's no way to fix that post World War II or Great War, or really since the printing press, roughly speaking. What you end up getting is industrialized, pre-packaged mass mythos in the form of a bunch of shattered stories. And this is a new issue entirely. And it didn't happen right after the printing press came out, which is what's confusing to people. Well, why didn't it happen like right away? Well, because the printing press came out, Christendom still existed. And that was holding everything together. And that was the most important thing. And, adding splintery stories was never going to do anything in Christendom because Christendom had people who were close to you, who were part of your community, who were part of the hierarchy of your community, helping you to get formed within that community, giving you the slight variations, the supporting stories around the mythos, the common mythos that you needed to hear so that you would get better, or that your community needed to hear so it would get better. With industrialization, you don't have that, right? And what happens is a failure of society in general to treat you like a person that needs integration into it, that needs to have a home, a space, a thing to do, and needs to link that thing to do to something other than, well, money, which is very flat. Like, oh, I only have a job to make money. People would say that to me, and I'm always just aghast. It's amazing to me that anybody would say that. I never worked for money. The big difference too, because it allows you to negotiate better and to make more money. Ironically, when you're not doing things for the money, it's the result of this flat world. Jobs are only about money. What? People need to have things to do that are connected to the world where they feel valuable and valued. You want to feel valued? Do something valuable. It's that simple. And the thing is, because the World War II mythos, roughly speaking, if we're talking that way anyway, uses industrialization and mass marketing, which is caused by the contradiction of science, which dissects first and then performs this middle out thinking trick. This post-World War II mythos can't do anything except remove you from the world. And this is wrapped up with the problem of science. Science must at once sort of posit the existence of a place to do science, a neutral place from which to operate an objective material reality, which doesn't exist, by the way. And then science can begin as an authority. And why would we need science as an authority? Where did the science as authority thing come from? Well, this comes from roughly Immanuel Kant. It comes from roughly the recession of the church. When the church was the authority, there was no room for another authority. Science, which is birthed by the church, doesn't have a space to occupy and can comfortably be the area where the wealthy people who can't do a war contribute to society. Faraday comes to mind, a wonderful contributor. Maxwell, right? These people had a place, and it wasn't going to be, fame and fortune for them in the standard way. It was going to be doing science. And sadly, this objective material reality, which again, science requires to justify being the authority in the Age of Gnosis, where propositions is knowledge of the highest value. Lab coat priests, anyone? You've heard that before? Well, this is a better frame for understanding that. That objective material reality also destroys science, because science becomes a war of the arbitrary. Because in objective material reality, things are arbitrary. If objective material reality existed, everything would be arbitrary. That is true. That is true. The observer problem all over again. But then it's what the observer wants to see that the observer sees in objective material reality. You can justify anything in there. And the reason why you get this objective material reality and this sense of sort of independent thought and the ability to do all these things is because science is independent validation of ideas transmitted through propositions. White papers, anyone? Research papers? Those are the basis for science. I write down my instructions. I write down my hypothesis. I write down my conclusions. And then you can reproduce it using that information, which is written down. I don't have to go to your lab somewhere halfway across the world and do the experiment with you. I can just transmit it, either tell it to you on the phone, or you can see it written up somewhere, or I can just send you an email now. So you can see that flattening of the world. And that's the ultimate flatness Age of Gnosis system. So this independence, this way of coming up with things, and then look, rest assured, someone's going to copy them. It's going to be wonderful. That's all the result of this objective material reality idea of science. And the thing is, you can see a lot of this stuff pretty clearly, right? So let's look first at this flat world issue. There's a delivery problem, right? A movie doesn't actually draw you out of yourself. It invades your imagination, your imaginal realm, and puts the flat world from the screen into you. It projects it into your eyes. And because it's flat, you can absorb it relatively easily, and all the pieces that are missing get filled in by your imagination anyway. And it's not a lot of cognitive effort to take something that's visual and incorporate it into yourself and fill in the missing, we'll call them the hard pieces, with any number of things. Right? Because the screen is objective and independent of you in a way. If you do the same thing with a radio broadcast, it just requires more imagination and more work. And the things you're imagining are shapes and colors. You're imagining forms and relationships. But then what's something like a radio program telling you? Because that's closer to oral tradition. And how does that affect the way you think when you primarily hear your stories versus see your stories, especially on a flat screen? And the thing is, this doesn't just happen on the movies. It also happens, and these clever, sort of bizarre feedback loops happen with comic books. Comic books are cheap and easy and flat. They're very simple children's versions of the mythos, the World War II mythos, explicitly in almost all cases. And they're actual myth, according to my earlier definition. You can see my earlier video here for that, because they contain superheroes, which is a weird way to talk about the world, because they're not just heroes, which is a little strange already. They're superheroes. So that means anybody can be a hero. So any given quote individual can be a hero, but these are superheroes because they have superpowers, not regular natural powers, superpowers. It's just a very strange corruption of the language. But look, that's not the only way that this manifested. You have to understand that before comic books even, we had things like cowboy dime store novels. The dime novels were an amazing phenomena, very flat, very individualistic, right? Forwarding this so-called rugged individualism. And you could say, well, Mark, that predated the Great War. Absolutely it did. This has been going on for a long time. But again, reading might require, even different from hearing things or seeing them, worse, right? Might require a completely different set of skills and might engender a completely different way of thought. And that might actually be important because we're stuck in the age of gnosis, right? These propositions have taken over. And then all the fantastic things, the fun things, the interesting things, the things that really make an impression are not talk, and they're not reading books. They're movies which get right into you and cause all these transformations, like the Matrix movie did. That movie just caused a bunch of things to happen in a way that no discussion on the internet is ever going to do. And there's lots of very good reasons for that. But you have to consider that in all cases, movies, comic books, dime novels, right? You're removed from the world rather than forced to seek to be part of something larger or outside of yourself. And the larger and outside of yourself is something that, to some extent, is the responsibility of the author. The author needs to attract you to connect with other things. And if that author is speaking to you with stories or retelling the oral tradition myths to you in the moment from your location, it is a lot easier for them to modify those myths. I know it's the science people are freaking out. You can't modify the myth if one word in the paper changes. It's a different experiment and then the conclusions are invalid. Of course they are. In the flat, linear, discrete world, that would be true. That's not the world we live in. Thank goodness for that. And the thing is, this flatness that occurs is seen most clearly in something like comic books, where they rewrite character origin stories. They have different authors reimagining the same superheroes, right? And it's a mess of storytelling. And yet, at the same time, some of the best stories come from comic books, for sure. There's no question about that. And we could argue about the artwork or whatever. I mean, some comic book artwork is amazing. I get that. You dissect it into all these pieces: storytelling, character development, artwork, right? That's very scientific, right? To dissect the thing, to try to sort of understand it or reproduce it. But that's how you get this reinvention, recreation, constant new, novelty. Oh, which Superman origin story do you prefer? Wait, what? And it's not because of good storytelling that people like comic books. It's because the characters are heroes, or again, these superheroes. The stories in comic books tend to have a lesson. There was an inclusion in the comic book. Those comic books are really close to you. Boy, they're easy to buy. They're easy to read because they're written for younger audiences in general, right? And so they're very accessible. And they have some of that flatness for sure. Let's step back and sort of look at all the things that are sort of happening at as many layers as I can manage. Hopefully it's enough. During this period, it's really post-Napoleon, but Napoleon causes, well, the French Revolution causes all the problems. It started before that, but that's when it breaks out, right? It gets really bad at the French Revolution. Obviously, the French Revolution is horrific. And what happens is there's a transition from the great old powers of Europe to the young new powers. The Prussian Empire collapses. Germany becomes a thing. It wasn't a thing before this, which is actually really important to realize. It was a very small region called Germania by Julius Caesar. And that's not Germany, guys. I mean, part of it may be in Germany. That's the best we can do, but it's not a very big part either, right? So that power is rising. The United States is obviously rising as a world power, mostly due to its size and ridiculous abundance of resources that nobody could have imagined prior to the discovery of the continent. And why are these powers rising? What is causing this? Because the new way worked. Whatever the new way is that you think is the United States, and to some extent the success of Germany through Otto von Bismarck, it seems to work, at least from a material perspective. The material fruits are kind of impressive on both fronts. And so, even though Germany, will say, causes the Great War, it's due to the rise in power. And to this day, we're still using almost exclusively German technology worldwide. That's just the way it is. It's a strange thing, too, because people don't seem to understand the impact of that and what that might mean. And the thing is, there's a big lie here. The big lie is that democracy is the key and that you can fix the problems of the French Revolution by doing away with the Napoleon guy, because he was just bad, keeping all the productivity of the machine. Napoleon was a famous artilleryman. Accuracy and precision and mathematics were the keys to his rise through the ranks of the military. They were the keys to his success. And he's the one that came up with, well, let's draw lines on a map, put a government in place, and call it a thing. And that was seen as successful. I mean, we still have this country called Italy, which is at least 3 places, depending upon who you talk to, right? Sicily should not be part of Italy. Northern and southern Italy are just different. They're just different. And maybe they're fine as, little provinces inside the Holy Roman Empire when you have different titles for each place you go as the king. But it's no good for Emperor Napoleon. That doesn't work. And of course, I've talked about this elsewhere in my history videos with Adam. You should check those out. They're all excellent. And so that great lie, we can just, since all people are good, or would be good in a state of nature or something, Rousseau, anybody, we just hand people democracy and everything improves for them. And of course, that doesn't work in Germany specifically. That's what causes World War II to some great extent. I mean, the Treaty of Versailles ensured a second act to the Great War. But the thing that causes the horrors of the war is the democratic election of a certain person. And everybody just papers over that for some reason. I can't imagine why. We realize you can't just put a government in place, draw lines on a map, and call it a day. But that's very attractive to people that experiment would work, because it seems to have worked with Germany, because it's kind of what Otto von Bismarck did, to be fair to him. I mean, he kind of did that, and it kind of sort of worked to a great degree. I mean, still the fastest growing pseudo-nation, I guess, because it's not really a nation, that has ever existed, as near as I can tell. And, the fact that people sort of did that sort of deliberately, sort of with a plan, right? Fair enough. Quote, Emperor Palpatine, unlimited power. It's a very attractive mythos that undergirds, like, we have control of things at the country scale without the interference of some goofy thing like Christendom. Who needs that around anyway? That's just morals and ethics, after all. We could derive that from law, I guess. Yeah. And we draw these lines on a map, put the government in place, bang, we're done. And the thing is, people see productivity and material things as a triumph of a good life, because they have an easier life with less war. And how does that come about? Well, we take the fruits of war, which is almost always technology, by the way, always has been historically. Leonardo da Vinci worked for warlords, and in his spare time he invented cool stuff, but he was required to invent military machinery in order to have the favor of the nobles, whichever nobles he was working for at the time. But we see this technology making our life easier. I mean, microwaves are a wonderful thing, right? That war technology sort of trickles down. I know trickle-down economics doesn't work, except it absolutely does. But also, clearly, war technology makes everybody's life better eventually. It's just the way it happens. And there's more evidence, right? Again, Germany has the best technology. We're still using German technology today. Nothing's been innovated past Germany, really. And so if technology is your measure of success at whatever layer you're looking at, maybe you're a politician, you're, oh, look at all this technological success. Or maybe you're just a pleb and you're like, oh, I love my microwave, right? Or I'm part of the intellectual class and look at the great intellectual tradition created by the success of technology. Sure. Then the German model it is. Otto von Bismarck's your man. So that's some good evidence. And then let's look at this sort of from the academic perspective, right? There's this prevalence of German philosophers in our culture to this day. Why? And then what replaces the German philosophers? This German thought is somehow modern. with the rise of technology. And sure, it's a reasonable enough term when you place it in that particular area. Now, obviously, I think it goes way further back than that. But what replaces it? French thought, postmodern, because the French and the Germans are still fighting. So they're not launching bombs at one another and throwing manpower at one another with guns, but they're still fighting. And that's the fight for culture, is take the culture away from the Germans as exemplars of certain aspects of culture and pull it back to the French, right? And we're still trying to pull it away from the English to some extent, because they have a fair chunk of it too. It's a very strange thing at the academic or intellectual level. At the bottom layer, though, you see the triumph of the individual through things like democracy, right? And look, the individual, no matter what sort of education level they're at, because now we have a minimum standard of education. Wonder where that came from. Germany. There's an easy system to understand other places, because countries are just lines drawn on a map with a certain type of government. And then there's a certain culture embedded within that. Of course, that doesn't work, because if you draw the lines on the map through multiple cultures, like Germany, that's a good example. Ukraine, at least 3 cultures. The USSR, I don't know how many cultures are in that mess, right? But that happened, like all of that happened, right? Any one of the line drawings they did on the continent of Africa, and redid every couple of years, or maybe even every year, just absolutely crazy. It gives you, that's Ethiopia. That's what we know what that. Oh, that's Egypt. We know exactly. Wow, Liberia. Of course, we know what that is. Italy, we know exactly what Italians are like. Don't tell the Italians that. Right? Don't call the Sicilians Italians. They don't like it. Right? And so it seems like an obvious success of both technology and democracy, because the world is easier to understand. And so there's no need for centralization. I mean, democracy is the ultimate decentralization of government in a way. And the internet proves the success of decentralization. Of course, that's an impression and it's totally wrong, but you can see where it comes from. And what a set of models to follow. And this is all wrapped up in this myth of World War II. And at the same time, you could look at this from other perspectives, like the military perspective. Success is the German blitzkrieg, for sure. For sure. It's not the only success, but man, that's a big success, and it's enabled through technology. So the military is all in on technology. What do you think the military technology spending is in the United States? Right. What percentage of the spending on military spending is just technology? Like, just develop this at a ridiculous, maybe a valid, justifiable, ridiculous cost, but a ridiculous cost nonetheless, right? To politics, success is propaganda. You'll hear people talk about Jacques Ellul and guys like that. And okay, Bernays, sure, but I mean, that doesn't really work all that well, or we'd all be propagandized already. And if you were properly propagandized, you probably wouldn't be able to talk about propaganda, because they would be the water you swim in. So it doesn't seem that successful. Meanwhile, to the intellectuals, success is science, because science is driving technology, which is a lie, by the way. Engineering drives technology, not science. So it looks good all the way down and all the way up. And any of these frames leads you to the same set of conclusions, that the modern progressive agenda through decentralization and technology is good, because it's working good at a bunch of different layers. And any way of looking at it leads there. Anyway, it doesn't matter where you're at in the hierarchy. And that also creates what I would think of as a bigger problem, this normative order being established. But the normative order is the same as saying believe the science. How did that work out? shouldn't have believed any of that, quote, science. A, it wasn't science, but B, you shouldn't have believed those people. And at the same time, for religion, like wholesale, all of them, unfortunately, nice becomes the way. Because war is too terrible to contemplate somehow. And we've like moved past that somehow, which absolutely have not done. And so hippie Jesus is born and given unto us. It's a big problem. It's a very flat way of thinking about the world. If you're just nice to people, they'll be nice to you because treat others as you would like them to treat you, and problem solved. And anybody can hold that in their head. Anybody. But to hold reality in your head, even a small part of it, you have to be pretty smart. It can't be, well, I'm going to be nice to people and they're going to be nice to me, and now we don't have a war. That doesn't work. That's insane. But society, culture has gone insane as the myth of World War II has broken down. As a t-shirt that I bought once from Sargon of Akkad's store says, Star Wars is pro-Jedi propaganda. When did he release that? 2019? 2018? I don't recall. But that's a good indication that the, quote, myth of World War II is breaking down. That's a story, Star Wars, within the myth of World War II. And if people are questioning who the good guy is, the myth is broken. And how's it broken? With a t-shirt with printing on it. Hysterical. With a few posts on the internet. And sure, memes seem like an upgrade, but are they? And do they upgrade enough? And that's part of the problem of the breakdown of the myth of World War II. We're scrambling to replace a bunch of the things we've lost. The ideals and ideas and values that we aren't struggling with, but sort of take for granted now, have left us in Domicide. Because we worship the progress of modernity, which we measure by technology. It's completely bonkers. So hopefully this gives you a little bit better understanding of the myth of World War II, the stories surrounding it, and why it was a doomed project from the start, aside from not being a good story, being a bunch of just anti-historical statements that have no bearing on fact or existence. It also isn't told the right way. It's industrialized. It's not told in a way that can work. It's not communicated properly in a rich way. And because that has happened, because we've tried to replace a proper oral tradition and mythos that's been given to us orally by people who are at least familiar with our community over time as we've been growing up, we have sought to fill that gap with these other mechanisms, this industrialized propaganda. And yes, let me kind of state that more clearly. The loss of oral tradition specifically was always going to eventually, it didn't do it right away. This is why people are fooled, because the time lag, the momentum lag, was always going to lead us to a world of confusion and domicide as we tried to replace these myths handed down by oral tradition with propaganda. It's the only option. We need those stories. We need that engagement. If it's going to be beamed to us by a flat screen, it's going to change the way we think about the world. And we'll be less able to engage in the poetic way of informing the world. Because poetry is best conveyed through oral tradition. Hopefully I've given you a lot to think about, and you can see more clearly the significance of the myth of World War II, why it was doomed to failure. See a bunch of patterns which point to what actually started this problem, we'll say, which I've mentioned elsewhere several times, and maybe engage in, well, the problem formulation should be something like, well, we have this flat world and a bunch of people who have been propagandized into flat world thinking, and now we can't really assess how able they are to get out of it. What do we need to do that assessment? And what tools do we need to bring to bear to address this issue? Now, obviously, my team and I have been working on this for quite some time, and we have some of those answers, but as always, we need lots of help. Working on another book, working on board game and a few card games to try and address some of these things we'll say at scale, but ultimately the best solutions work at scale just fine within a hierarchy. And until we discuss the hierarchy and what that means and how to understand it and be embedded within it, we're going to continue to have problems. But right now, I don't have any problems because you lovely people have given me the thing that I value the most, which is your time, energy, and attention.